Our concern, obviously, is for them as much as it is for those who have managed to leave. Our staff and volunteers in major population centers within Ukraine continue to provide assistance as much as is feasible, given the ongoing security and safety problems. This past weekend, we held a summit of our regional ambassadors and aid providers under the auspices of our international relief agency, Malteser International. At that time, we were able to review both the growing extent of the refugee crisis as well as the initiatives we are taking to support the growing swell of primarily mothers and children and a small number of senior citizens. As of this morning, it is estimated that almost 700,000 individuals have made the journey across the borders of Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, and Moldavia. And each day that the conflict continues, the flow of anguished families will grow. We have seen some nations go out of their way to welcome these individuals and to help them through the trauma. Our Order of Malta staff along the border with Ukraine totals over 5,000 personnel, with tens of thousands of volunteers doing everything from serving hot food and drink, caring for the victims of injury and accident, providing counseling and emotional support, and assisting in securing of short-term accommodation. Volunteers from locations away from the border, many of them from other countries, representing churches and community groups, have driven their cars and vans to provide transportation to new arrivals to ensure that they are given every opportunity to find a place to stay. We are coordinating our activities with international aid agencies, such as the Red Cross and the UNHCR, and are engaged in an international fundraising program to ensure that adequate resources continue to be available for the support and maintenance of those in need. We are encouraged that the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva will be holding a debate on human rights in Ukraine today. Representatives from our government will be participating in this important discussion. We appeal to nations of goodwill to appreciate the trauma experienced by all refugees. In particular, we appeal to countries who are receiving refugees to extend the same welcome they're offering Ukrainians to those of other national and ethnic groups who have been caught in this conflict and who are seeking security. The offer of help and support must cross ethnic, racial, and cultural lines and not be tainted by discriminatory acts or attitudes. This conflict in Europe drives home the realization that the issues of internally displaced persons and the needs of refugees forced from their homes affects the whole world: Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, and now Europe. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta for the statement. I now give the floor to the observer of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, International IDEA strongly condemns the unprovoked war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation with the involvement of Belarus against Ukraine, a sovereign nation and a democracy. This is in breach of international law and international agreements and a rules-based international order that underpins the shared objective of global peace and the existence of organizations such as International IDEA. The invasion order by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, is a blatant violation of the UN Charter. As firm believers in the rights of peoples to exercise their fundamental rights and freedoms, we convey our full support to and solidarity with the people of Ukraine. They are innocent victims of this aggression. We salute the brave partners and democracy activists with whom International IDEA has engaged in recent years when Ukraine made huge progress towards being a stable and thriving democracy. We call on the international community to spring into action to protect them and mitigate the humanitarian consequences of the invasion. We cannot fail to note that the military operation was launched while the UN Security Council was meeting to discuss the crisis. We reiterate our firm belief that international crises should be addressed through the means of multilateral diplomacy and resolved on the basis of the principles of the Charter. It is particularly unfortunate that this naked rejection of these principles happens during a pandemic that has rendered evident the need for increased global cooperation to make the world governable and to achieve justice for all. In these days, we are witnessing what an unchecked ruler for decades trampling fundamental rights and freedoms of his own citizens can do to undermine peace and democracy beyond his own borders. Ukraine is a country that has successfully reached democratic standards over the past 2 decades, from respecting media freedoms to free and fair elections, local democracy, and the fights against corruption. It is no wonder President Putin is scared of such democratic vibrancy at his doorstep. This is a pivotal moment for Democrats all over the world to stand united in support of Ukraine. It is also the moment to reinforce action to counter and to prevent the rise of authoritarian regimes elsewhere, which cannot survive without kleptocracy and the systematic violation of human rights and freedoms. We call on Russia to immediately withdraw its military forces and fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Revanchist interpretations of history and attempts to change borders based on ethno-nationalist fantasies offer not a luminous path for humanity, but a route towards darkness and endless cycles of violence. They certainly don't provide any hope to the younger and unborn generations that will bear the brunt of the climate crisis, or to the billions of vulnerable people around the world that are yet to realize the promise of a life free from fear and want, and the promise of the Agenda 2030. Those are the real challenges of our age. We encourage the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to make use of his good offices to advance ceasefire talks, humanitarian access to the war-affected areas, and protection of civilians, and particularly the most vulnerable ones. We urge UN member states to adopt and enforce sanctions against the Russian Federation until withdrawal of their forces from Ukraine and the full restoration of its territorial integrity. We urge UN member states to do whatever it takes in compliance with the principles of the UN Charter to stop this war and prevent any further escalation of conflict. International IDEA will do its part in collaboration with the United Nations, our member states, and other democratic governments and organizations to protect in Ukraine and elsewhere the principle that every country has a right to freely determine its own fate on the basis of the will of the people, freely expressed. Democracy's institutions and processes are the best means to protect the right. Today, we must stand up for these principles. Today, we must stand up for Ukraine, which embodies these principles and defends them to our greatest respect. Diakoyu, thank you.
I thank the distinguished observer of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item. The General Assembly has thus concluded this stage of the consideration of Agenda Item 5. The Assembly will resume its consideration of Agenda Item 5 entitled Letter dated 28 February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations, addressed to the President of the Security Council S/2014/136, to take action on a draft resolution issued as document A/ES-11/L1. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine to introduce draft resolution A/ES-11/L1.
Mr. President, Secretary General, distinguished delegates. We are living through a defining moment for our generation. Our generation is the generation that was supposed by our predecessors to be saved from scourge of war. That is why our predecessors created the United Nations. And yet today, it falls to us to save future generations. Let me read the following text. Our position is that whatever grievances a nation may have, however objectionable it finds the status quo, aggressive warfare is an illegal means for settling those grievances or for altering those conditions. It may be that the nation faced desperate problems that would have warranted the boldest measures short of war. All other methods, persuasion, propaganda, economic competition, diplomacy, were open to an aggrieved country. But aggressive warfare was outlawed. The defendants did make aggressive war a war in violation of treaties. They did attack and invade their neighbors in order to effectuate a foreign policy which they knew could not be accomplished by measures short of war. And that is as far as we accuse or propose to inquire. End of quote. Said in his opening statement to the International Military Tribunal on November 21, 1945, in the Palace of Justice at Nuremberg, Justice Robert Jackson, Chief of Counsel. And these words are addressed today to Mr. Putin, Mr. Shoigu, Mr. Lavrov, Mr. Volodin, Ms. Matvienko, and perhaps dozens more, but certainly they are not addressed to the Russian citizens, those Russian citizens who try to preserve their dignity. For almost a week, Ukraine is fighting under the bombs and missiles, fighting in the face of armadas of hardware. I will not recite all facts of new war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Russian troops have committed since my previous statement 2 days ago. The list is so long that it will run out of time. The crimes are so barbaric that it is difficult to comprehend. Facing the total resistance of the Ukrainian population, Putin's regime has proceeded to widespread use of indiscriminate weapons such as multiple rocket launchers and aerial bombs against the residential areas. Ukrainians are being killed by Russian ballistic missiles and thermobaric weapons. Just yesterday, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zhytomyr, Mariupol, Melitopol, and many other cities and towns sustained heavy shellings that killed dozens of innocents, including children. Ukraine deeply regrets that a student from India has become a victim of this shelling by the Russian armed forces in Kharkiv. We offer our deepest sympathies to India and the relatives of the victim. A Chinese citizen was also injured in another Ukrainian city because of Russia's deadly attacks. The Ukrainian and foreign citizens have become hostages of the Russian armed aggression against Ukraine. In Kyiv, Russian murderers hit the city TV tower, killing 5 passerbys. One of the missiles dropped on the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial, a sacred place of commemoration of Jews, Ukrainians, Roma, and representatives of other ethnic groups killed by Nazis during the World War II. What an irony when victims of Nazis are being killed for the second time by Nazi modern followers. As the president of Ukraine asked, what was the point of repeating the slogan, never again in 80 years? It's already clear that the goal of Russia is not an occupation only. It is genocide. On 7th and 8th of March 2022, the International Court of Justice will hold public hearings in the case concerning allegations of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Ukraine versus Russian Federation. Also, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has decided to proceed with opening of a formal investigation into the situation in Ukraine. Unprovoked escalation of Russian aggression against Ukraine gives reasons to believe that crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC continue to be committed on the territory of Ukraine. Along with the situation in Crimea and Donbass, recent events suggest that aggressors' troops continue to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. Dear colleagues, one might consider observing the bloodshed in Ukraine that it is not my war. It is a mistake. The evil will never stop. It requires more and more space to conquer. If tolerated, it advances further and further. The draft resolution is one of the building blocks to build a wall to stop it, to stop in Ukraine and not to let it go further. The wall that will protect all of you, in particular, younger generations. Distinguished delegates, by voting today, you also reconfirm your country's commitment to the UN Charter. After the vote, I invite you, ambassadors and representatives, to stop by the Indonesian lounge and to sign this little blue book. Little but of global magnitude. Every vote in favor of the resolution and every signature of country that voted in favor would be a historical reconfirmation of the Charter. It is very easy, ladies and gentlemen, to sign the Charter at time of peace. It is the duty to sign and reconfirm and implement the Charter at the time of war. So stop by the Indonesian lounge, put the name of your country if you voted in favor, and after you sign this book, I will hand it over to the Secretary General for keeping the book in his office, in front of him. So at every single moment, the Secretary General will get an inspiration from the overwhelming majority of nations who still trust in the UN, who still trust in the UN Charter. There is a very fragile gentleman, a very old one. He was born in a territory that was part of the Kingdom of Hungary. He will celebrate his 102 years birthday in 9 days. His name is Benjamin Ferenc. Benjamin Ferenc was an investigator of war crimes, a chief prosecutor at one of the 12 subsequent trials of Nuremberg. Later, he became an advocate of international rule of law and for the establishment of the International Criminal Court. With the permission of the producer, I would play a couple of seconds of his words. And I want you to listen very carefully.
Hard to do. 3 words, law, not war. If you can do that, you save every day billions of dollars, which you can use to deal with the legitimate complaints of old people who need medical care, students who have to pay for their tuition, all the legitimate complaints which could be solved if we didn't spend the money on weapons to kill them instead of helping them. And that is the current system. Now, how are you going to do it? I will end by telling you how to do it and the principles which have guided me. There are three principles. One, never give up. Two, never give up. Three, I hear you, never give up. Good luck. I wish you the best of luck.
Please show respect. Show respect to the Charter. Show respect to the Secretary General. Show respect to this gentleman who will celebrate 102 years since his birthday. I call upon all responsible member states to support the draft. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. We shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. Before I open the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
President,
господин генеральный секретарь,
Secretary
уважаемые коллеги,
colleagues,
Россия
Russia
просит
would
поставить
ask for
проект резолюции
this
на
draft
голосование.
resolution to be put to the vote.
Призываем
And we
вас
call
не
on you
поддерживать
not
этот
to
проект.
support this draft.
Однако мы знаем
However, we
о
know
беспрецедентном
about the
давлении,
unprecedented
которое
pressure
наши западные
that our
партнеры
Western
оказывали
partners
на
are
огромное
exerting
количество
on a
стран,
large number of countries
заставляя их проголосовать
urging them to
так, как
vote
это угодно им.
as they see fit.
Это нельзя назвать
This
даже
is not
давлением.
something even that we can call pressure.
Это были открытые
It was
циничные угрозы.
open and
Нам
cynical
об этом
threats,
известно.
and we know about it.
Этот документ не
This
будет
document will
способствовать
not
прекращению
allow us
военных
to
действий.
end military activities.
Наоборот, он
On
может
the
одобрить
contrary, it could
киевских,
embolden
ободрить киевских радикалов
and
и
Kiev
националистов и
radicals
дальше
and
любой ценой
nationalists to
определять политику
continue
в
to
стране,
determine the policy of their
удерживая в
country at any
заложниках мирное население.
price, holding peaceful civilians
Причем
hostage,
не в
but not
переносном, а в
in the
прямом смысле
figurative
этого слова.
sense of the term, but in the literal
Сейчас
sense
именно
of it.
так и
Now,
происходит
that
в
is what
ряде
is
крупных
happening
городов
in a series
Украины,
of cities in
где
Ukraine
население
where
используется в
people are
качестве
being
живого
used
щита.
as human shields.
Сегодня стало известно,
Today we've
что
learned
вооруженные
that
силы
in
Украины
the
не дают
Ukrainian
мирным
military are
жителям
not
Мариуполя
giving
покинуть город,
allowing citizens of Mariupol to leave the city.
удерживают их,
They are
в том числе женщин и
They
детей,
are keeping them
в
there,
одной из
including
школ
women
Мариуполя.
and children there in one of the schools in Mariupol.
Насильно доставляют обратно всех гражданских лиц, которые пытались покинуть город по предоставленным гуманитарным коридорам. Нам также известно и о планируемых националистическими батальонами провокации, которые они заготовили с участием гражданского населения с тем, чтобы впоследствии обвинить в этом российские войска. Вопреки нормам международного гуманитарного права, в жилых кварталах размещается военная техника, системы залпового огня, артиллерийские установки. Мы сегодня передадим примеры подобных действий руководству ООН, которое до настоящего момента утверждало, что не располагает подобными свидетельствами. Хотя видеоролики, снятые простыми украинскими гражданами, свободно распространяются в интернете. Ответственность за это полностью лежит на украинских властях, так же, как и за безответственную и преступную раздачу оружия всем желающим. включая
weapons to
выпущенных
anyone who
из тюрем
wants one,
заключенных.
including those who have been released from
Что
prison.
уже привело к
This has
массовым
already led
случаям
to
грабежей,
many cases of
убийств
robbery,
и
murder,
мародерства.
and plundering.
Уважаемые коллеги, ваш
Colleagues,
отказ
your refusal
поддержать
to
проект
support
сегодня стал бы
today's draft
голосованием в
resolution
пользу
as
мирной
a
Украины,
vote
свободной от
for
радикализма
a
и
peaceful
неонацизма,
Ukraine, free from
живущей в
radicalism
мире
and
со своими
neo-Nazism, living in
соседями
peace with its
и
neighbors,
отказавшейся от
and
внешнего
refusing
управления.
to be managed from outside.
Именно на достижение этих целей
This
направлена
was
наша
the aim
специальная
of our
военная
special
операция,
military
которую авторы
operation,
резолюции
who the sponsors
пытаются
of this
представить
resolution
в
try to
качестве агрессии.
present as aggression.
Мы сегодня
We
слышали от
heard
украинского
from the
представителя
Ukrainian
слова о
representative
нацизме,
words about Nazism.
но он стыдливо
But he
умолчал о
didn't
разгуле,
mention
о разгуле
the
неонацизма
rampant
на самой
neo-Nazism
Украине,
in Ukraine itself,
о бесчинствах
and
неонацистских
the
и
rampant
националистических радикальных
neo-Nazism,
организаций,
neo-nationalist radical
о факельных
organizations,
шествиях
about torchlit processions
и прославлении пособников Гитлера.
and those who support Hitler.
Те, кто
Those who are
интересовался развитием
interested in the
украинского
development
кризиса,
of the Ukrainian
прекрасно
crisis and how
понимают
it's
его
developed,
генезис.
very much understand where it came from.
Действуя сегодня, мы прежде
Actions
всего
today
стремимся
we are seeing,
остановить
in action today we're
восьмилетнюю
trying
войну
to stop the
майданного режима с
8-year
населением
war
Донбасса.
of the Maidan regime on the people of Donbass.
За прошедшие годы
For the
наша
last
страна
years, our
сделала все
country has done
возможное и
everything it can,
невозможное,
and
чтобы
things
избежать такого
impossible to
сценария.
avoid this kind of scenario.
Мы, по выражению генерального
We,
секретаря,
according to
кстати
Secretary
говоря,
General,
перевернули
have
все камни
left no stone unturned,
и постучались в
knocked
каждую
on
дверь,
every door.
однако так и не были
However,
услышаны.
we were not listened to.
Жители
Those living in
Донбасса
Donbass
продолжали
are
и
still
продолжают
being
бомбить,
bombed.
не собираясь останавливаться на
They
14
don't plan on
тысяч
stopping
погибших,
at 14,000
подавляющее
victims,
большинство из
the
которых
vast majority
приходится
of which
на жителей ДНР и
are
ЛНР.
living in the LPR and DPR, were living in the LPR and
Цели
DPR.
нашей
The aim
специальной
of our
операции,
special
объявленные на основании
operation
статьи
is
51 Устава ООН,
announced on the
выполняются и
basis of
будут
Article
достигнуты.
51 of the UN Charter and
При
will
этом
be
мы
achieved.
не наносим
However,
ударов
we
по
are not
гражданским объектам и
carrying out
мирным
strikes
жителям.
on civilian
Не верьте
facilities and
огромному
civilians.
количеству
Don't
фейков,
believe the
распространяемых
large
в
number of
интернете на этот
fakes
счет.
spread around the internet on
Эти
this.
фейки
These
пеклись,
fakes
как
have
пирожки
only
в Центре
distributed like biscuits
информационно-психологических операций
operation
специальных
centers, a special
сил операции
effort,
Украины.
special
Этот центр вчера был
operations of
уничтожен.
Ukraine, and this center was destroyed.
Мирный сценарий для Украины можно
Peaceful
ускорить, если
scenario of
радикалы
Ukraine could happen if
позаботятся
the
о
radicals
сохранности
concern
жизни
about
граждан своей
preserving
страны и
civilian
не
lives
будут
in their
прикрываться
country,
им.
and rather than hiding behind them.
Такого призыва в
This
тексте
is a call
поставленного
in
на
the
голосование
text before
документа
the
нет.
vote. There is no reference to this call in
В
the
нем
text
также
before
ничего
us
не
to vote
сказано о
on.
незаконном
Nothing is
перевороте в
mentioned
Киеве,
about the
когда в
illegal
феврале
coup in Kiev
2014
in
года
February
при
2014 with
попустительстве
the
Германии,
connivance of
Франции и
Germany,
Польши
France and Poland,
и при поддержке
and with the
Соединенных
support
Штатов
of the United States,
был свергнут законно
where the
избранный президент
legitimately
страны.
elected president of the
В
country
этом
was
проекте нет ничего и
overthrown.
о
This
том,
draft
что
does not
новые
mention anything
националистические
along
власти
the lines of the
тотчас же
new
ограничили
nationalist
права граждан
authorities
на
are
использование
limiting the
русского
rights
языка.
of citizens to use the
Это дало
Russian
старт
language. This was a green
огромной
light for a
цепочке
large chain
нарушений
of events,
базовых прав
of
жителей Востока
violations of
страны,
the basic
и не
rights of
только
those living in
Востока,
the east of the country, and not only in the east of the country,
включая самое
including
ценное
the most
право на жизнь.
valuable right, that right to life.
Многие из вас
Many
не
of
хотят
you
ничего
don't want
слышать
to hear
о
about
трагедии,
this,
которая
about the
началась на Украине
tragedies happening in
после
Ukraine
майданного
after
переворота
the Maidan
2014
coup in
года,
2014.
о заживо сожженных людях в
And
Одессе,
those
о
the people who
преследованиях и
burnt
убийствах
alive in
несогласных,
Odessa and the crimes of those who didn't
и самым
agree
ярким
against those who didn't agree
проявлением
with them. And the most
этого
blatant
стала
example of this
развязанная Киевом
was
война
the
против Донбасса.
war against Donbass rolled out by Kiev.
Ничего в документе нет и о том,
There's
что на
nothing in the
протяжении
document
8
either
лет Соединенные
that
Штаты
over
и
the
Европа
last 8
накачивали и
years, Europe
сейчас
and the
накачивают
US
Украину
have been
вооружением,
pumping
помогая
Ukraine
майданному
with
режиму убивать мирных
weapons
жителей
so
на
those
Донбассе.
people can kill civilians in Donbass.
Оправдывали лояльные
And
киевские
the
власти за
loyal
полное игнорирование
authorities
минских
in Kiev
договоренностей
are fully
и
ignoring the
саботаж
Minsk
резолюции
agreement and
Совета
sabotaging
Безопасности
Security Council
2202.
Resolution 2202.
Наконец, этот
Finally,
проект — это
this
очевидная
draft is a
попытка
clear
тех, кто за
attempt
последние
of those who, over the
десятилетия
last
совершил
decades, have
бесчисленное
committed
количество
huge
агрессий, незаконных с
numbers of
точки зрения международного
aggressions,
права военных
illegal
операций,
and international
переворотов,
law, as well as
одним из
coups,
которых
one of which
стал и майданный
indeed was the
переворот на Украине,
Maidan coup in
выставить
Ukraine.
себя
They
поборниками
present
международной
themselves as
законности.
champions of international law.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
most sincerely regrets events taking place in the east of Europe. Russia and Ukraine have always been friendly country to the Republic of Serbia, and Serbian people perceives Russians and Ukrainians as fraternal nations. We felt loss of life of each man in Ukraine is true tragedy. The Republic of Serbia is committed to observing principles of territorial integrity and political independence of states as one of the basic principles of international law based on UN Charter and Final Act from Helsinki from 1975, which guarantees the right of states to inviolability of borders, just like it is committed to preservation of sovereignty and integrity of its own territory. The Republic of Serbia, likewise, advocating respect for territorial integrity of other sovereign nations, and regardless of not agreeing with all formulation state in resolution, will vote in favor of resolution. I am obliged to point to PP 13 and remind that the first attack against a sovereign state on the soil of Europe after the Second World War took place not so long ago in 1999, when 19 countries attacked at that time Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, primarily Republic of Serbia, when there was no appropriate reaction of such distinguished institution to this flagrant violation of UN Charter, despite the fact they still suffer from consequence of severe violation of fundamental principles of international law by others. Serbia is not giving up these principles even today. The Republic of Serbia will continue to advocate termination of conflicts, expecting that the parties will invest additional efforts into reaching diplomatic solution and creating conditions for peace throughout dialogue. Serbia will provide all kind humanitarian aid to endangered Ukrainian citizens while remaining committed to peace and consistent respect for international law. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Serbia. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you,
سيد
Mr.
الرئيس،
President. Mr.
إن مشروع
President,
القرار
the
المعروض
draft
أمامنا
resolution
اليوم
before us today
يمثل بوضوح
clearly
نهجا منحازا
represents
يستند إلى
a
دعاية
prejudiced
سياسية
attitude based
وأداة
on
من أدوات الضغط
political
والابتزاز السياسي.
propaganda. It's a means of political
لقد
pressure.
حرص معدو مشروع القرار على
Those who
تضمينه
prepared the draft
لغة
resolution
عدائية موجهة ضد الاتحاد الروسي
incorporated an aggressive
تستهدف
language
الميل
against
من
the
مواقفه المشروعة
the Russian Federation to belittle its
والمستند إلى
legitimate
مشاغله الأمنية
stand based on
وحقه
its
في حماية أرضه
security
وشعبه من
concerns
التهديد
and its
الحقيقي
right to protect its
للأمن
people
القومي
from
الروسي.
the threats
ولم
to
يقتصر الأمر على ذلك، بل
national
طال القرار
Russian
بيلاروسيا أيضا.
security. Belarus is also impacted
إن مشروع
by
القرار
this draft
هذا
resolution. This draft resolution
يمثل نفاقا سياسيا مفضوحا.
represents a flagrant
فلو كانت
political
الولايات المتحدة
hypocrisy
الأمريكية وحلفائها الغربيين
had the
جادون فعلا
US
في
and
نزع
its
فتيل التوتر في
Western
تلك
allies
المنطقة
been serious in
لكانوا قد أوفوا
de-escalating the
بالوعود التي
situation.
قطعوها للاتحاد الروسي
They
قبل
would
3
have
عقود
fulfilled the
بعدم
promises
توسيع نطاق
they
حلف الناتو
undertook
شرقا
3 decades ago, not
وتحويل
to
أوكرانيا
expand
إلى
EU
مصدر
and
تهديد مباشر وحقيقي للاتحاد
transform
الروسي.
Ukraine into a
ولكانوا قد
continuous
ضغطوا
threat
على
to
سلطات
the
كييف للالتزام باتفاقيات
Russian
مينسك
Federation, and they should have
ووقف
pressured
الانتهاكات الجسيمة
Ukraine
بحق
to
المدنيين
abide
في
by
دونباس.
Minsk and to stop the violations against the civilians in
هذا
Donbass,
ناهيك عن مسارعة تلك الدول
let alone those
إلى مد
countries'
أوكرانيا بالأسلحة
eagerness
الثقيلة والصواريخ
to supply Ukraine with heavy
وفتح باب
weaponry
التطوع
and missiles,
لمواطنيها للقتال في أوكرانيا،
encouraging volunteers to fight
مما
in
يؤشر
Ukraine.
بوضوح إلى رغبة تلك
This
الدول
indicates the
في الاستفزاز
clear-cut
والتصعيد
desire of those
وليس في التهدئة
countries
والاحتواء.
for provocations and not for containment and
إن عرض
de-escalation.
مشروع القرار اليوم
This draft
يترافق مع
resolution
ضخ إعلامي مضلل هائل
coincides with huge
وحملات
media
كبيرة لتشويه الحقائق ونشر المعلومات الخاطئة.
campaign to spread erroneous information and
فهو
lies.
لم يصمم للبحث عن
It's
حل
not
حقيقي
designed to
للأزمة
find a clear-cut and real
وإنما
solution for the
لشيطنة
crisis,
الاتحاد الروسي وتشويه صورته.
rather to defame the Russian Federation.
إنه نص مليء بالثغرات
It is
وبعيد عن
a text
الموضوعية
that is full of loopholes
ويتجاهل الأسباب الحقيقية
and
الكامنة وراء
untruths.
إشعال
It
فتيل هذه
ignores
الأزمة.
the real reasons for the
السيد
escalation
الرئيس،
of tension and for the
إن
eruption
الذين
of hostilities.
يثيرون الحماسة اليوم بشأن الدفاع عن
Those
ميثاق الأمم
who
المتحدة
are eager to defend the Charter of
كان
the United
عليهم أن
Nations
يظهروا
now
نفس
today.
الحماسة
They should have
ضد
shown the
استمرار
same
إسرائيل باحتلال الأراضي
eagerness
العربية المحتلة
vis-à-vis Israel's continued occupation of
وضد
the
اعتداء
Arab
القوات
territories
التركية على سيادة
and
الأراضي
the
السورية.
aggression committed by the Turkish
وماذا عن
forces
انتهاك قوات
against
الولايات
our territory?
المتحدة
What about
الأمريكية
the US
بسيادة وسلامة
violations of
الأراضي السورية؟
the territorial integrity of our land,
سيدات
Syrian
والسادة،
territories?
إن رفض الجمهورية العربية السورية
Syria's
لسياسات الغرب في الهيمنة
rejection of Western
والتدخل في الشؤون
hegemonistic
الداخلية
policies
للدول الأعضاء
and interference in the internal affairs
وإشعال
of states,
وإطالة أمد الأزمات
prolongating
ونشر
crises,
الفوضى
promulgating and
وتكريس
spreading
الانتقائية
anarchy,
والازدواجية في المعايير
opting for double
وفرض الإجراءات
standards and
القسرية الأحادية
selectivities, imposing unilateral
يحتم
sanctions,
عليها رفض مشروع
make
القرار
it
هذا
necessary for
والتصويت
us
ضده.
to reject this draft resolution
شكراً
and
سيد
vote
الرئيس.
against it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saint Vincent and the Grenadines.
Mr. President, it is clear from the debate over the past 2 days that the membership of the United Nations is united in its call to end the war in Ukraine and return to diplomacy. St. Vincent and the Grenadines wishes to offer an explanation of its vote on the draft resolution before us today. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines will vote in favor of the draft resolution. We will vote in accordance with our steadfast commitment to upholding the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, which form the core of multilateralism and gave birth to our United Nations 76 years ago. It bears repeating, Mr. President, that these principles underscore respect for sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states and enjoin member states to refrain from the threat or the use of force in the conduct of their international relations. Our support for the draft resolution is rooted in our conviction that the strict adherence to international law, including international humanitarian and human rights law, and the principles of peace, dialogue, and compromise for the preservation of humanity is not optional. As a small island developing state, full compliance with the bedrock principles of international law remains an existential issue. We take the floor again, Mr. President, to repeat our call for these principles to be applied consistently and upheld as universal truths, instead of selective, uneven, and unpredictable tools to further great power ambition anywhere and by anyone. Historically, and in recent times, we have witnessed the naked hypocrisy, double standards, and cynical misapplication of international law, which we have condemned. Today, we strongly emphasize that our august assembly should apply the fundamental principles of our charter impartially, irrespective of the size, economic, and military power of the principals involved. Mr. President, in the midst of prevailing global challenges, such as the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, we simply cannot afford another conflict. War does not manage grievances. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, therefore, calls for an immediate ceasefire to avert further bloodshed, human suffering, and a global catastrophe, and to engage in peaceful dialogue to find a solution to this war post-haste. Today, we must unite for peace. Thank you, and peace profound to all.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have heard the last speaker in explanations of vote before the vote. Before proceeding to take a decision on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. In light of Article 18, paragraph 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to taking action on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 by a 2/3 majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The 2/3 majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of draft resolution A/ES-11/L1. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become the co-sponsors of A/ES-11/L11, Barbados and Cambodia. If any other country wish to co-sponsor A/ES-11/L1, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. There is nothing further, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES-11/L1, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/ES-11/L1 entitled Aggression Against Ukraine. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. The result of The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 141, against 5, abstentions 35. Draft Resolution A/ES-11/L1 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr.
السيد الرئيس،
President.
لقد
Mr.
صوتت
President,
تونس لصالح
Tunisia
القرار اليوم
voted
انتصارا
in favor
لمقاصد
of
ومبادئ
the
ميثاق
draft
الأمم
resolution in
المتحدة
support of the
التي
principles and
انبنت
values
عليها
of
سياستنا
the UN
الخارجية،
Charter on which our
وتأكيدا
foreign
لحرص
policy is
بلادنا
based.
على إنهاء
We would
الأزمة
like to
باستعمال
emphasize
الوسائل
that
السلمية
the
لفض
crisis
النزاعات
must be
التي تبقى
settled
السبيل الوحيد
by
والأمثل لوضع
peaceful
حد
means, which is
للتصعيد والحيلولة
the
دون
ideal
مزيد
solution
تدهور
to
الأوضاع وتفاقم
prevent
الأزمات
further
والمآسي
aggravation
الإنسانية.
of the situation and
لقد
further
شهد
human
العالم ما
tragedy.
يكفي من ويلات الحروب
The
والأزمات
world
بكل
witnessed
تداعياتها
so
المدمرة
many
على حياة الناس وعلى
grueling
السلم والأمن.
wars
كما
destructive
علمتنا
to
تجارب
peace and
الماضي
security and
البعيد
the life
والقريب
of people.
أن
Our
الخيارات
experience
العسكرية
indicate
لا
that
تحل
military
أي أزمة،
options cannot
وأن
solve
الحوار
any crisis.
والمفاوضات
Dialogue and
كفيلة
negotiations
بتسوية كل
can
الخلافات
settle all
وإيجاد
differences
الحلول
and
التوافقية
finding
لها.
compromises.
فالأزمة الحالية في
The
أوكرانيا
current
تأتي
crisis
في
in
وقت
Ukraine
بدأ العالم
comes at a
يتهيأ
time the
فيه
world
للتعافي من تداعيات
was
جائحة
getting
كوفيد
out of
والتأسيس لمرحلة
COVID-19
جديدة
and prepare
قوامها
itself for a
التعاون
new stage
والتضامن
based on
والانخراط
solidarity,
الفاعل
cooperation,
في تعزيز
and
العمل المتعدد الأطراف
effective
وتحقيق
engagement
أهداف
in
أجندتنا
multilateral
المشتركة.
action and achieving our
ونعتقد
common agenda.
أن العالم
We
لا
believe
يمكنه
that the
تحمل
world
مزيد من
cannot
الأزمات بهذا الحجم
undertake or
والخطورة،
cannot
ولذلك فإن
burden
تونس
itself by
التي استبشرت
further
بانخراط
crises.
الأطراف المعنية في الحوار والتفاوض
We encouraged
تجدد
the
دعوتها للمجموعة
engagement
الدولية
of the
من أجل
parties in
تضافر
peaceful
الجهود
negotiations,
وتكثيف
and we
المساعي
urge the international
لتشجيع هذه
community to
الأطراف على
intensify
مواصلة الاحتكام إلى
efforts to
المفاوضات بما
obligate
يساعد
these
على وقف العمليات
parties
العسكرية
to resort to
وحماية
negotiations in a
الأرواح
manner to
وتهيئة
cease
الظروف لإيجاد حل
hostilities
دائم
and to
لهذه
prepare the
الأزمة.
way for finding
وباعتبار
permanent
أن
solution.
الأمن والسلم الدوليين
Given the
كل
fact
لا
that
يتجزأ،
international peace and
فإن
security
تونس تدعو
are a
إلى
whole,
التعامل مع
Tunisia
مختلف
calls
القضايا
for
العادلة
dealing with
بمقياس
all
واحد
just
حتى تتمكن الشعوب من
questions
استرداد حقوقها
in one
المشروعة
standard so
وفقا
that peoples
للمرجعيات
can
الدولية
regain
وبناء
their
عالم
legitimate rights in
أكثر عدلا
accordance with
وسلاما
international
واستقرارا.
legitimacy
شكرا
to
سيد الرئيس.
build a more stable, more peaceful world. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative.
Good morning. Secretary General will make a statement now following the vote. ladies and gentlemen of the media, the General Assembly has spoken. As Secretary General, it is my duty to stand by this resolution and be guided by its call. The message of the General Assembly is loud and clear. End hostilities in Ukraine now, silence the guns now, open the door to dialogue and diplomacy now. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must be respected in line with the UN Charter. We don't have a moment to lose. The brutal effects of the conflict are plain to see. But as bad as the situation is for the people in Ukraine right now, it threatens to get much, much worse. The ticking clock is a time bomb. I'm also deeply concerned with its potential consequences for regional and global peace and security, and the world struggling to recover from COVID. Today's resolution reflects a central truth. The world wants an end to the tremendous human suffering in Ukraine. The same truth was clear in the rapid mobilization of funds for our life-saving humanitarian operations in Ukraine and neighboring countries. Our global flash appeal was met with record generosity. I'm deeply grateful to donors for their support. With that funding in hand, we will be able to scale up the delivery of vital medical and health supplies, food, safe drinking water, shelter, and protection. Looking ahead, I will continue to do everything in my power to contribute to an immediate cessation of hostilities and urgent negotiations for peace. People in Ukraine desperately need peace, and people around the world demand it. Thank you very much.